Hi, Mike. Hi, Nyambura. And hello, audience. So today we have a special conversation between Nyambura Wadrenge, No Direct Flight Nairobi's curator, and Michael Monua, who's part of the Surreal 16 collective. I'll let both of them tell us a little bit about themselves before we jump into our conversation.
Thank you, Nyambura. So I thought it's always weird coming from you going, thank you, Nyambura. My name is Nyambura. It's always fun. So hi, everybody. I'm Nyambura Wadrenge, the No Direct Flight Film Season Curator. I've had the privilege to put together this season, put together conversations, and also also work with Nyambura in creating all the content that you guys are liking, sharing, enjoying, and giving us feedback on. So this is really exciting. We're closing the film season right now. So for me, it's just, I'm, very emotional. Just the journey we've taken and the journey that all of you have taken with us. And so grateful to the filmmakers who allowed us to show their films in a time where we can contest how the digital space works, how does it protect the copyright of filmmakers. So thank you so much, filmmakers, for trusting No Direct Flight and myself with your work, and knowing that it is treasured, appreciated, and protected to as much as we can on the interwebs. So yeah, it's been a glorious journey, to be honest, and I've learned so much. I've been doing this for a couple decades, and now it's kind of where you look back and say you knew nothing. So No Direct Flight is like my PhD now in creating cultural products and really audience engagement and learning more about films that are coming from the continent and the African diaspora. So I am humbled, and it's a privilege to do this, and also to expand No Direct Flight into not just about films, but how we are looking at digital heritage, for example, with the discussion that we had with Chao T. Minor, and really looking at a living archive and a living museum, and films being also part of our cultural heritage, an important part of our cultural heritage. And then having the opportunity to have the sonic sessions with DJ Delight and Vivi, Fena and Ronnie Drum Queen and Espresso, and this really vibrant powerhouses and talents that are shaping the music scene in Nairobi and globally, and particularly through the digital space, and then the language discussion where Surreal 16 fits so perfectly in terms of local language being a part of the film, around Sheng being our language, the language of Nairobi, and who gets to own Sheng and how do we archive Sheng, and it again being a living archive of language in Nairobi, and of language in Nairobi through all the cultures that make it. So I am so humbled, and finally with Down River Road as our publishing partner, as well as People Stories Project, who really responded to all the films and responded to the work and situated in the Nairobi context, as well as a regional context, and brought in these different discussions around language and aesthetics, past, present, future, that I am just humbled to be here. And I'm excited to be talking to Michael Omonua, who is the Minister of Craft of Surreal 16 Collective. Yes, I did my homework, Michael. I did my homework.
I was wondering which one of us would point out that Minister of Craft thing. So
I also wanted to show I did homework. Aside from being a fangirl, I actually read up on this. But yeah, the Minister of Craft, Michael Omonua, whose film The Man Who Cuts Tattoos showed on Friday and continues to be online until midnight East African time today. And so what happens is, I'm really excited to be speaking with Michael Omonua, and really getting into Surreal 16 being our featured filmmakers. And if any of you got to watch my in conversation moment with Gayleen Gold, who is the No Direct Film Season creator, brain woman, and really gave me passed the baton to me, and I'm really trying to aim high and make her proud and make all of us proud. And what we talked about is that Surreal 16 are our featured filmmakers specifically because all that they've done is really responds to the work that No Direct Flight wants to do. How we're looking at our lineage of aesthetics, how we really evolving, collapsing boundaries, how we bringing back past, present, future, how we looking at storytelling in different ways. I love the way Serial 16 goes like, yeah, we're not going to shoot Lekki Bridge anymore. And I'm like, well, it's like Nairobi. If you do not have KICC, you have nothing. You do not know where you are. So it really, I think, this is just the reason why you guys are featured filmmakers. And again, your fiercely independent filmmaking and your collaborative processes that we don't see a lot of. They're starting to come up, but that commitment. So, hey, hi, Michael, how are you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Yambura, for the introduction. Just a quick introduction of myself. I'm a film director, writer and director. I've made a number of short films. I'm honored to be part of No Direct Flight. I was part of the London version as well last year, and I thought it was brilliant. So it's an honor to be part of it again for the second year, and also with my sort of Serial 16 collective colleagues too. Unfortunately, couldn't be present here, but yeah, we sort of came together in 2014. I met a CJ at TINAPA in Afrif, Africa International Film Festival. He had a film there, I had a film there. And I mean, I didn't know Abba by that time, but I sat down, spoke to CJ, we all sort of camped up in the same hotel and we just sort of got talking. Said, come and check out my film, Ojuju. It was a sort of very independent, low budget zombie film. So went, watched it, loved it, thought, oh my God, this is like the first like Niger film I've seen that's just all pidgin, feels very raw, feels very honest. It just felt like something like I hadn't seen before. And I had a short film on my laptop no one had seen. It was called Soneja Bleed. And so I showed it to him and he was just like, oh my God, like, what is this? Like, also in pidgin. And it was like we just had the same ideas, methodologies, influences, inspirations. And he was just like, oh, there's this guy, Abba Makama, you got to meet. He's a really good friend of mine. And then, yeah, sort of put me in contact with Abba. Abba's like, yeah, I've seen all your work. I was like, yeah, I've seen some of your stuff as well. And we formed a WhatsApp group and we just found that we were people that were just sort of in sync with one another. We felt like outsiders in this industry. I feel like, personally speaking, I often had people trying to sort of mold me into another kind of filmmaker, whereas I wanted to be, another kind of filmmaker. I wanted to be doing independent, artistic type of stuff that I was inspired by, I grew up watching. And whereas other people were like, oh no, don't do that. I'll go to people for advice and be like, oh, I want to make a short film about this and that. And be like, oh, forget short films. They're useless. Go and make straight into features. Yeah. And I was like, well, really? It's like, is that what I'm meant to do? Yeah. And I just felt like, my spirit was telling me like, I just needed to do something else and, follow my heart and follow what I actually wanted to do. And I feel, it was kind of like a blessing meeting like CJ and, Abba. It just felt sort of right. We came together at the right time. And we started having discussions. We had a WhatsApp group, I guess. And before the Serial 16 was formed, we just had loads and loads of discussions about the industry, where it was, where we were as sort of artists and filmmakers and, what we kind of wanted to do. I'm not sure when the conversations about a collective began. I can't really pin it down, but I know we had a lot of meetings, sit downs, and eventually it was just like, yeah, we're going to form a collective. It's going to be like Dogma 95, but it's going to have rules, it's going to have regulations, and we're going to sort of, sit down and map how we're going to do it, and et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I guess that was just sort of the genesis of it. Again, the name Serial 16, not entirely sure where that came from. I know the 16 is 2016. It was formed in 2016.
Okay.
Yeah, but the surreal aspect, I think it was Abba Makama who came up with that, Surreal 16, because he's a big fan of Alejandro Jodorowsky, the filmmaker, and he's into like surrealism and all that type of stuff. So I think it was Abba. I'm not sure. Could have been CJ, but yeah.
All right. So my other homework. So Abba Makama is our Minister of Rationalism, and the Minister of Development is CJ Obasi. So I'm feeling that maybe it was Abba in conversation with Obasi, and you looking on going like, okay, fine, sure. That's our name. So when I was talking to Nyambura, when I was really just talking about like what type of conversation we're gonna have and what type of direction we wanted to go in, I was thinking about I was like, I really want to know how Surreal 16 happened. So my version was this 3 men coming from different parts of Lagos, walking past Lekki Bridge, heading to a bar. Both of them disgruntled. My version is Abba is just looking his fabulous self at one end of the bar. I'm assuming you're all would go to the bar, so suspending some disbelief. So and then CJ makes a comment, and you kind of you lean over. So now we all have you in one shot. That was my version, and it's really great to hear how you guys met over craft and your craft, and recognizing that you all wanted to do something different. And now just going to like Dog Me 95 and really thinking about how Dog Me 95 was really going against, it was around the time, it was 95 going on into 2000, that a lot of Hollywood had decided to create what you call the tentpole projects. It was really the genre films. It was really big films, big budget films, really pushing out independent filmmaking in ways that accessing it was much more difficult. It was really moving away from, which was very interesting, because in the 70s, when we had the independent film movement that did start, and Michael Scorsese and all of those guys making Taxi Driver and all of that, and then the big Hollywood system, and now, and how it was me think of third cinema being Hollywood, second cinema being really actually putting the Nouvelle Vague, the French New Wave into that, which was supported by the government, always around aesthetics and high aesthetics, really an elitist approach to art. And then third cinema having to recognize production environments, and recognizing how even at times fiction might not apply, that documentary was a very important text and all of that. So I also wanted to talk to you about how your work is, if anything, I see, but if you see it influenced by kind of the third cinema ethos in a way, and also speaking more to the directors that have influenced you. Like for me, so much of it is Osman Sembene, Safi Faye, Jibril Mambetsi, those guys. And I'd really like to delve a little bit deeper into that. And then one aside, I also love Wong Kar-wai. In the Mood for Love is my favorite film. So if you could just get into that and how international cinema influenced you guys, as opposed to what we're used to consuming.
Sure. Yeah. I know CJ Abba and I, we discussed a lot of the Francophone, filmmakers and their aesthetic in sort of relation to what was happening in Nigeria at the time. We definitely got the sense that, their films were, they had a sense of like, they were very sort of socially conscious. They were very kind of, close to the ground. They had a sense of sort of realism that we felt that didn't quite exist in our scene in Nollywood, where our films tend to be very kind of aspirational and about kind of wealthy people more often than not. There are genre films, but they're usually very specifically, romantic comedies, or they were romantic comedies and wedding films, and they often had a lot of like slapstick sort of characters in there. Whereas, let's say Dogma 95, they were kind of this Hollywood's sort of infiltrating our market, and they're taking, they're changing our sort of cinema and our industry and sort of language that we use in terms of filmmaking. I know that was their main kind of focus and their main problem. Ours wasn't necessarily, cinema coming from outside influencing, what we're doing. It was more like the industry in sort of Nigeria and the sort of cinema that was present already. And it was just kind of like, well, is there any space for us in this market? People, if you were trying to be artistic, especially around that sort of 2014 time, I know there was a lot of sort of, oh, look at them. They think they're elitist. Yeah, they're essentially elitist filmmakers, niche, no audience, festival filmmakers. We were sort of often called by people festival filmmakers, So there was a lot of that going on. And it was difficult to sort of, what's our identity? Who are we? What type of cinema are we trying to create here? Is it that kind of third cinema? Is it? I always felt like it was going to be inspired by sort of maybe a sort of neorealism, Italian neorealism type cinema that I feel like the Frankenfone films were inspired by. I'm more of a Sissako guy. He's one of my favorites. Waiting for Happiness, just because it's a very meditative film as well, and a lot of my work is inspired by that sort of transcendental, meditative cinema. Even like The Man Who Cuts Tattoos, it's got a lot of that in. And the Waiting for Happiness is one of my sort of favorite films, not just favorite African films, is one of my favorite films. And it's not very much seen, but it's I think it's Sisako's best work, no doubt. And yeah, in terms of Wong Kar-wai, he's definitely a huge influence. I know I think the first time I saw Chungking Express, it was at film school. Is that at film school? Yeah, and I was just like, what is this? What is this? Yeah. And then of course I went off and watched everything else he made. But no, in terms of like the 016, our inspiration, what we're influenced by, it's diverse. It's from lots of different regions. What Abbas sort of really into is, not exactly the same what I'm really into and CJ is into, but we definitely, shared the idea that cinema should be like it is an artistic medium, and you are trying to say something in your voice, and you're trying to find a voice first, and then you are trying to say something in your voice. And yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, I mean, it's a conversation.
Okay, all right, yeah, sure.
We're just trying to figure out who Serial 16 is, and watching. So how I met Serial 16, actually, once I say this story, Nyambura, please feel free to ask us a question or two, is I met Serial 16 work, Visions, your anthology.
Okay.
In 2018 at the NBO Film Festival. And that is where I met also Tega Okiti had come, who was the co-programmer of No Direct Flight London.
Okay, Tega, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember she's the one who programmed, she had programmed the thread. And she was like, have you, watched Serial 16? I'm like, Serial where? And that's also something that needs to be discussed, talked about, and continued to be addressed in the African and particularly within Africa, because I find Africa diaspora has a privilege of cultural imperialism, which basically in this sense being, this is where the UK, the Euro-American kind of distribution model that they will have access to, whereas we do not, you know, more often, like for me, before I go back to what I was saying, me having access to African films was when I went to university in Montreal, Canada, and watching some of the films that people made that other Africans never got to watch, yet they were in African film festivals, you know, and I didn't know my African film history until 2003, when I took an international cinema class. And suddenly there's La Noire, there's La Petite Vendeuse, there are all these people, and I'm like, where have they been? You know, I've not seen, and therefore you believe that notion of Africa has no culture, because that's what the colonial imperialistic notion around culture in Africa is. We had no culture. And I mean, everybody who's watching, you can watch Chao T Miner's conversation with Nyambura Mutani, that really delves into some of the reasons. And also we're really in a great position now where we can respond to this archive and this colonial imperialistic archive. So going back to that is just that, you know, we don't get to see these films. And so when she said, why didn't you see it? I was like, because we don't get to watch African film here, you know?
Very true, yeah.
That's a fact. And so there I was watching Visions. So having another moment that I had maybe around 2003, where I'm like, oh my God, this is happening on the continent in Nigeria, just like, I think the flight is 5 hours, like really, it is close to home. It is not across an ocean. And I fell in love. And so what happened was I had a festival that I was asked to program films, and I called CJ, like I started communicating with CJ, and I'd asked him for Hello Rain. So even when you talk about how your aesthetics are so different and what you're interested in is so different, and in that anthology, I can see it, and it's beautiful and wonderful that such different perspectives exist, and that my version is that you challenge each other. So so when meeting Serial 16, it became, I started following you through CJ and learning more about his work, and just, you know, being inspired because it was happening on the continent, and then meeting Abba later and really talking about like even the expansion of Serial 16 and the focus. And, you know, you're not a collective, for example, like Dogme, which broke up, I think by 2005 because it was too rigid. But for me, in it, like you have in the DNA is the ability to grow, evolve, and expand. That is really, truly wonderful. So that's how I met Serial 16, and watching all the things that you've been doing, Hello Rain, Lost Okoroshi, The Man Who Cuts Tattoos, or Juju, I mean, has been such a blessing, a treasure. And I hope that in this, what No Direct Flight for me has done is archive some films that I never would have had access to, create those networks that I can in some way continue to show them in whatever capacity that is, and continue to expose ourselves to ourselves in ways that we don't get access to. So Nyambura, please, questions.
No, I mean, you said something that I've been thinking about, and maybe this is something both of you could speak about, which is how African films travel within Africa, you know? So how are your films traveling, Mike, but also like generally, how are films traveling and how can we make them travel better? And I mean, travel is the right metaphor for this festival because, you know, no direct flight, but how can they travel, you know, more easily, you know, and be more accessible once they arrive at their destination?
Yeah.
And being cleared customs.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think even it sort of ties into the whole sort of archival thing as well that you were talking about. I know in our white paper that we originally wrote back in 2016, you know, we delved into that issue, especially specific to sort of Nigeria, because I know like the pioneers who were actually shooting in the 70s on film, you know, as someone who's like wants to dig into sort of, you know, film history and all that kind of stuff. I was looking on YouTube or, you know, searching for like the films that were made back then, you know, by the likes of like Ola Balogun and his sort of and those from his era. And it was, yeah, it's just like you can't find that kind of stuff anywhere. It's not on DVD. It's not. I heard that they had their films still on film reels, like underneath their beds and stuff, like, so you can't actually get access to them. I know that the BFI does screenings, but how does that help people who are in Nigeria, and actually want to maybe see that kind of stuff? So yeah, we have a real problem with like archives and all that type of stuff, and archiving work that's been made over here. Very difficult to gain access. In terms of like getting your film out there, traveling, it's mostly film festivals, I guess. They're the ones that tend to be more open to seeing kind of works from this region. People even here, in the gatekeepers, they'll often tell you, oh no, just go outside, go to festivals. That's what this type of work tells me. So yeah, I do really want, sort of, when I make stuff, want Nigerian people to watch it. Essentially that is who I'm thinking about when I'm making this stuff. I don't feel, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't feel like my work is so difficult or esoteric or niche that, people won't get it or be able to follow. But I don't know, maybe I could be wrong there. But I would like the opportunity to have, to screen in cinemas and stuff. I know when CJ made Ojuju, which is a zombie film, low budget zombie film, he was told it was an art film, it couldn't go to the cinema, and he said it's a horror film, it's a zombie film, it's kind of commercial, but yeah, true story. He was told it's an art film, it's not going to work out here. So he making a low budget zombie film struggled to gain access to sort of cinemas here, and had to essentially send that film to festivals abroad, where it's gathered in over time an audience. And I think he's managed to get it onto streaming platforms and stuff. But yeah, it is mostly just festivals for now, and Netflix. I know Abba's got a good relationship. He had his Green White Green on Netflix, and he had The Lost Okoroshi distributed worldwide on Netflix. So he's done pretty well in terms of getting his film out there and distribution deals and stuff. But I feel it's still early for tattoos. Who knows what the future holds? I had COVID just as I was starting my campaign. Now that COVID's died down a bit, let's see if I can start making some deals.
Yeah. I concur. And what I'd like to just expound on a little bit is our film history and access to our own film history is, I think, has to fall under to repatriation of film artifacts and restitution of film artifacts, because you have the Institut Français that has most of the films, La Petite Vendeuse, Osman Sembent, whether, and then if you look through the archives, so those are the two, because those are two that I was trying to get, and we don't have them here, for example, right? And who owns the rights to these films? Who owns the distribution rights to this film? And that is also a very important discussion for filmmakers when they're making films, is how do they assign this rights? And so just speaking, yes, to the film festivals, which I think are important. And it's always important to have films in film festivals. We should have them more. And we should also expand the notion of film festivals. And this is what I think, for me, No Direct Flight was, we kept on calling it a festival. And it reached a point where, like, no, this is a film season. It is a moment that we're putting together a certain amount of films. These are all special screenings, so that none of the filmmakers ever lose out on the notion of, what region have you shown in as a festival? This is special screenings. This is just also a way to whet the appetite of an audience, really. And I think this is the expansion of film festivals. And now understanding that, with COVID, and I do not say this lightly, because I know people have gotten infected, they've passed away, people's lives have been absolutely changed. And so when I say an opportunity, I don't take this lightly. I'm saying the opportunity now is seeing different ways of building audience around film. That does include the internet, as well as kind of lo-fi ways of sharing films. particularly short films, thinking about what's up. I know most people will be like, no, but these are different ways of doing it. And that's also a discussion around how you monetize it, right? So also, how do we change how we look at film making money? How do we also look at films being audience development vehicles? How do we look at films being really pleasure for us to sit and enjoy and know the man who cuts tattoos exists, and not having someone from London educate me about African film. There's no problem with that, but the idea of access. So I think there's a part of repatriation of our film artifacts, as well as having different moments that we share, we take from our past film, our past in terms of film history and TV history too, because I think we forget that there was a break after the 70s once video came in, is that we started to have more television programs in Africa, so to speak, more so than filmmaking and such a vibrant cinema space, also based on like the funding that was available, whether it was mainly through NGOs and everything else. So also really contextualizing our television industry. And that's what was interesting about the writers within through Downriver Road, the publication, is that they also started to make links between film and TV, film, TV, music. So I think there's an expansion and situating our films in a continuum, and continuing to curate. Not just me, anyone can be a curator, by the way. It is not a precious activity or job. You don't need a scarf to look, curatorial. But what the point is that we all need to participate in bringing these things together and referencing them to each other. So now learning about what Surreal 16 is doing, and then Surreal 16 telling us, oh, by the way, this is what is happening in Lagos as well as Benin, because CJ right now is in Benin, right? He's shooting. Yeah. So building that network, and it becomes like almost an oral history that we're forming around this. So yeah, that's what I think about it. And then I love what you said about us having an evolution of aesthetics and an evolution of storytelling, and making choices that are not necessarily acceptable in the mainstream makes us esoteric and niche. I think that is very patronizing, because you're basically saying that art can't evolve, So any filmmaker who's out there who's been told that, as you can see, we have Michael Omonoa, CJ Obasi, and Abba Makama, who had to overcome that hurdle and have now continued to make the films that they do and sit in that confidence. I think it's important because we're basically telling ourselves that we cannot process complex ideas. Like it reaches a point that how dare we speak to ourselves in that way? So it really is important to me, more often than not, to choose films that we don't get to see, that don't reflect the mainstream, that are not ordinarily considered acceptable, because people want that content, to be honest. Yeah. They do. Just to encourage anyone who's watching this, that being esoteric and niche might actually be the best way for you to continue to evolve your career.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like in terms of like our sort of language of cinema in Nigeria, it's very different to a lot of other places. The whole idea of like Nollywood, everyone knows what sort of Nollywood aesthetics, kind of feels like and looks like. It isn't sort of the same, and like audiences have sort of got used to that kind of aesthetic and that feel, and the way sort of movies have been made here. So it's also, I guess, maybe educating audiences that there are other kind of sort of ways to make Nigerian film, because I know that a great many do watch films from other places. Bollywood is very popular here, stuff from India, Korea as well, and yeah, like K-drama type stuff, and sort of Bollywood dramas are really, really popular, and like the Hollywood stuff is like Game of Thrones and all that. So they do have access to other types of film aesthetics, film, you know, in terms of language and the way stories are put together and told. So they do kind of understand it, but in terms of like the Nigerian aesthetic, I feel, especially at that time, maybe not so, but it is starting to change more and more as more younger, newer filmmakers start to come in, and you know they've had access to a diverse range of sort of filmmaking, the way stories have been told, you know, around the world, and they now see that and feel like, oh yeah, maybe I can try and tell a story that way as well, and make it but do it here in Nigeria. So yeah, there's a lot of that happening now. But in terms of like audiences, it's, you know, once you've been fed something for so long, to now try and give them something else, it generally does take time. But it feels like an educational thing as well when people are screening a certain type of film for audiences that may not be used to it, or be like, oh, why is this happening? Or why aren't they cutting? You know. So I know with me specifically, when my sort of filmmaking style, I know I tend to like silences, you know, between my actors. And I know people have always been, oh, Mike, why are they silent? Or, you know, there's too much silence, so why aren't they talking? I get that on set a lot with the actors as well. You know, when they're doing their back and forth, and you know, you're trying to tell them that they need to take more time before they respond. And there is some pushback at first, but as it sort of goes along, they sort of get used to it. And I feel with audiences, it will be the same. Over time, they'll start getting used to sort of the new ideas and new types of voices, trying to tell different types of stories. I'm seeing it more and more these days, so it's encouraging.
I find that really curious, this notion of training your audience, and maybe Nyambura can speak a little bit about what it's like on this side of the continent, you know, where I feel like there's, you know, there's sort of films that go on to festivals and so on, and then there are films that are not really, I mean, they're Kenyan films, if you know what I'm saying, you know, your Riverwood and so on. And how do we go about educating an audience? Because I imagine that would be something of interest, even to people who are not necessarily filmmakers, but they are, you know, they're makers, and they're trying to bring something fresh to an audience that is already accustomed to something, you know. They think they know what they like, and maybe they know what they like.
Do they though? Do they? That's a really good question. And it makes you, for someone like myself in this moment where I'm curating, so to speak, you have to sit with yourself. And I think the moment in which you start to recognize the most elitist part of you, because you're there cultivating taste, so to speak, right? But who are you to decide? You know, what are the parameters for this decision-making process? One thing I've realized is, don't think about, and it now goes might go contrary to notions, what Michael was talking about, but it fits in at the same time. Don't go around trying to educate the audience. Let the audience tell you what they need to know about it, the thing that they didn't get, you know? Don't, so the education is more them having a reflection and asking questions that you're ready to address, and start to make the links between different aspects of the film or perspectives, if I may say so. So for example, I was curating the European Film Festival, and some of the counselors were like, I'm not sure this film, you know, an African audience or Kenyan audience will understand it. I asked them, is there human? Are they doing everyday things? Is there anything special that's happening that cannot be comprehended? They're like, no, it's just a film about this, that, and the other, family, blah, blah. I was like, so it's a human experience. We will understand it. Some things will always be lost in translation, particularly if we're dealing with foreign language, but not so much. Is it a human? Are they going around mundane things? Is it specialist knowledge? If not, then life goes on. And what happened was, I was working with this also artistic group, like an art center, called Hui Palace, and it's in Kariobangi, which for us is Kariobangi, Korogosho area, which is, as a low-income area, part slum, or even gentrifying slum now, it's that space. And so they were really wondering, like, how will this land? So what I did is I didn't take the films there. I told them, this are the list of the films, this are the synopses, look at the screen as you decide what you want. I'll create the program and say, this is what we took there. And the difficult films were the ones that were such a high response to them. Everybody enjoyed them. People saw the links. And that's the thing. I think the point is, are you human? And if you are, you're going through a human experience. It might not be, like, for example, I don't come from a culture that has tattoos, but the idea of what tattoos mean in that culture, I will find a link within my own culture. Maybe it's through dance, performative, like expressive dance, a type of spiritual dance. Like maybe that is it, And so I think to unapologetically just sit in a space, as long as you're not hurting anyone, is to create the education without thinking you're educating, is to create a way that you're like, oh, so you like this, you like white rice. Have you tried pilau? Oh, let us graduate you to biryani. But it's, it's that move and then we'll have jollof rice. I have to bring that in. But it's that move of really saying, and here's more, and here's more, and here's more. And taking the films to the audiences. This idea that the audience will come to you, particularly when our viewing habits, I'll talk about Nairobi, are on the phones, buying the DVDs off the street, or going to that shop where you get the DVD, or you borrow the DVD. Do not expect your audience to now leave the comfort of their neighborhood, their village, where they're used to being, and the fact that transportation is so expensive nowadays in Nairobi that you're not coming downtown. You're not crossing town to come and watch a film unless, and what happened at EFF is unless it is representative maybe of your community, and then you will take the trek. And that's what happened at EFF. We premiered Koch Collectives, Koch Film Collectives, A Chocolate City, that was about just life in Kariobangi a day in, and we filled over 200 and something seats at Alliance Francaise, and it was the best performing film, but it was from a community that they said will move. But at this point in time, and because the festival had been in their community, so they saw a link between themselves and this downtown space that they don't ordinarily go to or just pass by, because to them, it makes no sense. It doesn't reflect them, right? So I think there's that, taking your films to the different communities, and that's where I love to sit in terms of curating. It's not just about like festivals, it's like creating a package and taking it to the different communities and the people who are interested in building that love for the films and discussion. There was a time we were in a bar and people came in and people were like, oh, what's showing? We're like, yeah, we've got some films here. They walked in. After this, we left them talking, and they're talking about the film at the bar. Like, I was tired, I need to pack up and go back home to start the day again. And we left people just there. And that's the thing, show it in bars, show it in churches. I don't know, but just don't think of it in the same way that we've been taught to consume this elite art called film.
When you said churches, I remembered how, Nyambura, you know this, but in the early days of the Kenyan visual arts scene, people used to have exhibitions at social halls and churches and so on. But now visual art is a thing that's only in rarefied spaces, like you have to go to a gallery, a white cube, to be able to see art. And in a sense, showing our work in this place would be reclaiming a space we had previously used, for art. So that's really interesting to think about. This is a question for Michael. What do you think is the place of collectives in filmmaking, not just in Nigeria, but also like on the continent and even in the world? Like I think there's something that collectives bring to art making, and I'm curious about where you position them within the world of filmmaking.
Oh, wow. I feel like perhaps firstly, I don't feel like there's something that should be, there's a collective and like there's a wave, and I feel like two different things. if that makes sense. Like, I don't feel like we're like the 016, we're like the, you know, the French New Wave, or let's say the Japanese New Wave, or like the 70s era, you know, because I often think those things were seen after the fact, if you know what I mean. It was like, oh, okay, so this, you know, 60s Japan, when they had a lot of these like independent guys working out the, you know, studio system, and they made really independent films. Or you had the French New Wave, and you know, with us, we're consciously trying to set up a kind of wave, if that makes sense. We're kind of like consciously set up something that becomes something within our own kind of film space, for want of a better way of describing it. I feel like we're definitely trying to create a movement in our space. I feel it's incredibly important because there's a lot of filmmakers who have come to me over the years and just been like, oh, wow, I wanted to do this type of thing, but I was encouraged not to do that type of thing and do that. But then I saw what you guys are doing, and you know, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm definitely going to go ahead and do what I want to do. In terms of Africa, just sort of like the space in Africa, the only other collective I knew when I was setting up, when we were setting up the Shore 16, was the Nest Collective. I think that was like the only other people that we kind of knew in this space. And beyond that, it was mostly just like I said before, Dogma 95, and then we're inspired by sort of these specific film waves, which I don't feel like were kind of like the same thing that we were trying to do, because a lot of those things sort of came after the fact. Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, I lost you there for a minute. Yeah, sorry. And a lot of those things sort of came after the fact. So I feel like with the Suro 16, we're consciously setting to try and do something. We're mostly just inspired by the Dogma 95 guys. And we hope that in a few years that people will look back and be like, oh, okay, so this was that movement that started at this particular time. And, you know, this was sort of films that we were making. And it does become like a kind of wave that, you know, we hope that other people will jump on and be inspired by. But yeah.
Those feel like very lofty ambitions, but we love lofty ambitions in this house.
Sure. Yeah.
No, we must have them. We must have these lofty ambitions.
Yeah.
I mean, just about imagination, and that's a driving force of film. We're sitting here because we imagined conversations between filmmakers and cultural producers, art makers, art workers, and here we are, edited, cut, and off into the world on the internet, you know. So I think lofty ambitions are very important. To set the tone and the principle of how you want to work and what you want to accomplish, maybe. And for me, Nyambura has always heard me say this: where's the pleasure? You know, yes, we're doing this, but you know, it has to be, there's a pleasure that we have, and there's a joy that we develop, and then you let this products, artifacts go into the world and create another wave of experience. So it's important to have lofty ambition, I think. Very important.
Yeah. And, you know, especially considering like the space, you know, we kind of were in, where I don't really feel that there were many people trying to do what we were trying to do at the time. Maybe they were, but in isolation, and we weren't really aware of, you know, those guys, girls, or, you know, whoever was there trying to do it. But we were mostly just, okay, we don't see anyone, you know, doing this thing that, you know, we're trying to do, sort of like this kind of artistic work, and, you know, there's no encouragement here, and no one's, you know, none of the gatekeepers are sort of helping us, or, you know, wanting to fund us. So it did feel like, oh, us against the world, back to the wall. we're better if we come together and try and form something like this collective. And that was part of the reasoning as well behind it. And you know, when I say we want to become like a wave, yeah, sure, it's definitely lofty ambitions and stuff, but it was more because we were inspired by a lot of these sort of waves. But like I do want to be specific and say that it isn't the same thing, because a lot of those waves, they didn't know that they were in, or at least I don't think they know that they were in something at the time. They weren't sort of conscious. They weren't sort of conscious of it. I think they got their sort of titles after, you know, 10, 15 years after the fact. So yeah, you know, we're very sort of conscious about what we're trying to accomplish. It's, I would say, more of a movement than wave anyways, you know, just trying to establish like a movement, and something we hope that will grow over the years. We do hope to add like more people to like the collective, you know, over time, other filmmakers and people maybe from other, you know, different sort of backgrounds as well, different sort of disciplines. I mean, over time, we do hope to sort of expand and maybe even look to like change, you know, the white paper and what we're about, and sort of rewrite that as the industry grows and the industry sort of changes. I think that's important as well. So you're not just like this sort of static thing that, you know, what was important in maybe 2016 is maybe not so important now. Because, you know, we have guidelines, we have rules, we have 16 rules, and, you know, those things.
Tell us some of those rules. I forgot about your white paper, which I'm like, everybody, including myself, we need a white paper for life. But if you could just delve a little bit more into those 16 rules.
Okay, yeah. So
are these the rules that include no establishing shots of Lekki Bridge? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that rule was actually kind of tongue in cheek. Because we found like at the time in Nollywood there were so many stabs of Lekki Bridge to show, oh, we're in Lagos, and then there'll be Lekki Bridge, and then you'll see maybe another part of Lagos or whatnot. So it just became this kind of thing that almost like a joke that we always see Lekki Bridge in Nollywood films. So yeah, that was like a tongue-in-cheek rule, you know, establishing shots of Lekki Bridge. We also had like no rom-coms, no wedding films, no melodrama, no slapstick. Yeah, so the rule. Say again.
How will we survive without this thing?
Yeah.
Well, we're in an industry where that kind of stuff is saturated. So yeah, that was just for, you know, free filmmakers making up rules to sort of govern the types of works. But, you know, they weren't set in stone. You know, you could cheat, you could break a rule if you needed to. I think there was no sequels as well. Yeah, I can't remember every single one off the top of my head, but yeah, they weren't like these rules that were like really set in stone, like the Dogma, you know, 95 rules, you know, where it's like, oh, you can only use things found at the specific locations and all that type of stuff. Yeah, so we want that kind of, you know, we want that kind of set in stone. If you watch a Dogma film, you know it's a Dogma film. You know, the methodology is, you know, it's set in stone, and you got to follow those sorts of rules. But ours isn't kind of like that. Ours isn't like that at all, actually. And we're a bit different in that regard. We're free. We have the freedom to sort of roam and explore whatever it is we want to. And if you do break a rule, no one, you know, it's not like you don't get the certificate at the beginning of the film. Yeah, we're free to sort of pretty much do what we want. Yeah, exactly.
I think those rules actually are really great because it really makes filmmakers, storytellers, break away from what we're used to, right? We do inevitably replicate at times what we see, and it just becomes a part of the way we view Nairobi. Like, how would I shoot Nairobi? Okay, KICC and and whatever. I mean, that's Kenyatta International. in the world. And it was our tallest building for the longest time. And it had a it still does, I can't remember, I haven't been to KICC, but it had a rotating restaurant at the top, and that's where you can have, there's like helicopter things that go on there, and you can actually shoot some music videos have been shot now on that pad place, you know, at the top. So KICC, but how would it change, for example, if we started on Nyayo House, which was during the Moi era, was a known torture chamber? You know, I think I'm sorry, I'm just saying, like, thinking through how we think about Nairobi. And then also, I think what I love about what you're saying is then, there's one time I met this filmmaker who was from Embu. Embu is a city outside, it's a town. I'll get into trouble. I'm not going to call it anything because we're in the process of having towns and cities, and I might have a faux pas here. But the point is, Embu is not capital like Nairobi, and a lot of filmmaking and how Kenya has been defined is through Nairobi, and particularly through Kibera, which is one of the largest slums in Africa. So, and that is always at KICC, Kibera, and you continue, and that establishes how you view, how you see, how you decide you're in Nairobi. If you don't see Kibera, suddenly like, no, we cannot be in Nairobi, you know? And so this filmmaker from Embu also had a problem saying like, why is it Nairobi the representation of Kenya? You know, how are we also creating, and for me, how are we creating visual language or a visual palette for different cities, you know, different towns, different rural areas? How will I know? Why is it that I always know when I'm in Marseille or in, you know, what do you call it, Côte d'Azur or whatever? Like, how are we also as filmmakers coming out and not just shooting in Nairobi, for example, for us, for you, maybe just Lagos, and then Lagos being Lekki Bridge, maybe Lagos is other things, you know? So I think those type of roles, as much as some are tongue-in-cheek, are really important in changing the aesthetics and really evolving the aesthetics. So yes, we all should have them. I'm going to come up with 5 just for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something liberating about constraints, you know, like these are the limits within which you can work, and then trying to figure out different ways to do interesting things within those limits. Like there is something freeing about placing some sort of limitations on yourself, you know? And then trying to figure out which rules are worth breaking and why, you know, in a sense, explaining the rationale to yourself. You know? So.
No, yeah, absolutely. I know in like in the Nollywood scene, you know, for a long time we tended to, especially the films that went to cinema, they tended to be about, you know, the more upper class and elites and the 1%ers, and that's generally kind of much of what we saw actually. I feel that there's this sense that you've got to be sort of aspirational and be showing people who have made it or blown, or, you know, they're making a lot of money, they're driving nice cars, they're driving on roads that are well tarred, you know, like Lekki Ikoyi Link Bridge, you know, and they're often, you know, you see these films and they've often always got 24-hour light. It's, you know, they're walking down the street and the streets look really immaculate, and, you know, and you just don't see real life often in those sorts of films, like the actual reality of just, you know, ordinary people going about their days. And I feel like part of what we were trying to do is just say, you know what, let's try and show ordinary folk in normal settings, you know, an actual proper reflection of you know, just your average Nigerian person. I feel like that's almost radical, you know, in this side, because you get people often saying like, oh my God, you're showing areas of Lagos that are downtrodden and this and that. It's like, no, not really. I'm just showing kind of Lagos, you know. This is it. When I walk down the street, this is what I see. You know, you see electricity poles, the wires are all kind of knotted together, weather-beaten buildings, open gutters, NEPA, well, that's what we call power. Electricity goes off on a daily basis. maybe 3 or 4 times a day, you know, and that's the reality. You know, you can show that kind of 1% side, or that small part of Victoria Island where a few people, you know, live and go about their lives. But if that's like 90% of the cinema, then it's not actual real reflection of the cinema. And I think that's actually starting to change here, actually, of recent, because we're having more and more films that are showing kind of like a, you know, the actual reality of things. And I feel like when we sort of set up the collective anyways, that was definitely one of the major things we sort of talked about, and just, you know, showing the reality, you know, hence Pidgin English as well, you know, local languages and all that sort of stuff. That all sort of ties in with it, because that's like one of our roles, is like the encouragement of use of local languages in the cinema. So yeah, it all sort of ties in, and as you sort of add all these different roles and all these little layers, you start establishing like a visual language, I guess, and an aesthetic to sort of maybe like a slightly new type of Nigerian cinema, that when people watch it, they're like, okay, I get it. I recognize this place. It is Nigeria, but it is very different from the sort of aspirational type of cinema that we, you know, we're seeing, where some poor person suddenly becomes, you know, ridiculously rich, and, you know, they're buying mansions and they're buying fast cars, and then you don't really see anything beyond 5-star hotels and mansions. Yeah.
Fast cars and fast women. You forgot the other ones.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. So thank you so much. So before we wrap up, I just wanted for you to tell us a little bit more on Juju Stories, and how that's going. And I think Nyambura has a couple, 1 or 2 questions just to wrap up this really amazing time with you. Thank you so much for making the time, and let Abba and CJ know they were missed, and you were perfect. You were perfect. But there was you, so yeah.
About representative, I think the one question I would add, which is basically what Nyambura, that was my question to ask.
Oh, sorry. Forget I said anything.
No, but I was and have been interested in this notion of like anthology making, and how you go about figuring out what constitutes an anthology, how to make it, you know, that process basically. So that's my last question.
Okay. Well, yeah, Juju Stories is it's an anthology film by myself, CJ, and Abba. It's about Nigerian folktales with supernatural themes, kind of like semi-horror, supernatural Nigerian folktales type thing. It was inspired by ghost stories by Mizaki Kobayashi. I think it was made in the 60s, which is like another kind of anthology film. And well, I don't know. I can't remember exactly when the idea for this thing came about.
Those are the best ideas.
I can't say who came up with the idea or anything like that, because I honestly can't remember. But at some point, maybe in like 2018 or 2019, after we'd finished Visions, which was our first anthology film, we said we wanted to do a feature anthology. And at some point, Juju Stories came up, the idea of like just doing, you know, a film that was based on like Nigerian Juju, or like a folk story, you know, around Nigerian Juju. And we decided to just go off, come up with our own sort of idea. We said it would be like 30 minutes a piece, and we were just going to have to find a way to film each section ourselves, and then we'll put it together, and then we'll make it a feature film. And then I think like a year passed, and we didn't really have anything concrete. And it got to about 2019, and I think it was CJ was like, all right, let's get this done, because I want to be doing Mami Water soon. I've got my script ready, and after a tattoo screened at BFI, and Abba was done with his Okoroshi screening as well. CJ was just like, I'm ready to shoot. You guys have a window. And we're like, okay, well, there's no budget. So how are we going to shoot this thing? Yeah, what's his name? Oge Obasi, CJ's wife, she found some funding for us. So then it was just like a quick, all right, we have money. I have tattoos that I want to do. Let's go and shoot. Let's go and do this. And then yeah, so it was just a quick, let's write, let's shoot. Boom, boom, boom. We did it like over like 2 or 3 months, and yeah, it got done.
Wow. So I just like to say, just from what you've said right now, this is something I wanted to comment on, but I was like, the moment has passed, but you've made it come back about that fiercely looking for money, fiercely independent filmmaking. I think there is also what I think I can see, and I'm documenting a wave of independent filmmaking coming out of Nairobi, particularly because this is where it's my city, because now the filmmakers are self-financing. And because of self-financing, it's really changing the stories that they're making. And self-financing means that they have a freedom, because in Kenya, Nairobi, a lot of the films are NGO financed. So they have now their own kind of creative freedom. So they tend to make these short films. And also it tends to be a focus on short film making, not necessarily feature length. So it made me think about what you're saying. And now what you said made me think about it again, and really to say that, yes, actually there's certain waves that are starting to come up, and production companies starting to make a lot more money than they did before. So then earmarking some money to create a feature length film, which would be like an hour at most, not too long, and starting to make these films, and they start going out into the world. So yeah, I just wanted to congratulations on how you did that, and then also link it up to that. Yeah, it is emerging through more like self-financing on our side a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. We were actually fortunate to get finance, and it sort of came the last minute. I know I was talking, we're talking to Oge, and she was just like, okay, I can get this, I can secure it. And we felt like it wasn't going to happen. So I feel that was like part of the reason why we kind of delayed a lot of the finance talk and delayed sort of getting this off the ground. I just felt like the money was never going to actually come in. And when it did, it was a rush. I know because CJ wanted to do Mami Water, and he's on set now. So we're fortunate to have sort of just got it done in time.
All right. Nyambura, do you have any last reflections and like close this wonderful film season?
Yeah, but I was just saying earlier that I found this entire film season so illuminating on a variety of levels, because there's also something about speaking to a filmmaker about the process of filmmaking, what goes into it, like sort of seeing how the sausage is made and dissecting it. Like right now when we talked about money, which is a thing which, Nyambura, we try as much as possible not to talk about money, because, it's gosh.
You need to talk about the money.
and yet it's so important, so it's, and also linking filmmaking to these larger things, like to literature, say with DRR, or to archival practices, and certain historical facts and so on. So this has been really interesting. This conversation was fantastic, because it's always also nice to talk to someone who's on the other side of the continent, who is in a very different sort of context. Like the Kenyan film scene is not really comparable to the Nigerian film scene, but it's nice for us to be in conversation. So, as I say, very illuminating. This has been so much fun. Yes. And I love that it's going to live on, because Nyambura, I have a huge archival impulse. So it would be great also for us, especially because Michael said that one of the things they're actively doing is building a movement, building a wave. It would be so great for all of us to be able to revisit these conversations in a year's time, 5 years, or 10 years time, and be like, well,
yeah, absolutely.
You know, so.
And during that time, I'll have a scarf. The time I have the scarf.
As you do. I wore my artsy shirt, Nyambura. We have rules here.
I put in, this is my favorite thing because it's literally, it's called a boiler suit, but I call it an adult onesie. One touch, zip up, done. So again, thank you so much, Mr. Michael Omonua, the Minister of Craft of Surreal 16 Collective.
Where does that minister stuff come from anyways?
It's an interview from, I think, the BFI.
What did you go saying things on the streets, Michael? You didn't know?
No, I've heard it. I just don't know where you're getting.
I'll send you the link. I'll send you the link.
The article, it's right there. Like it got.
It's Tega, right? Yeah. Is it Tega?
Yes, it's Tega. Yeah, it's
okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to place it. All right. Okay.
I'm not here spreading fake news. Thank you so much. Again, Minister of Craft, Surreal 16 Collective, Michael Omonua, Director of The Man Who Cuts Tattoos. Thank you for that meditative piece that I've watched over and over.
Wow.
I'm just the pleasure of being a curator. You get to watch the films over and over, and so thank you so much. And I can't wait to see what yourselves, and Surreal 16 Collective do together. This is going to be a moment for sure. This is a cultural moment. We don't get to talk to each other, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's true.
Like, we're going to meet each other in London, and here we are. So thank you so much. And thank you for the gift that Surreal 16 is. And we can't wait to follow you guys and follow more of what you're doing. And then Nyambura, thank you so much for leading us in these conversations and really bringing this brilliant mind, this ways that you think, that I really enjoy working with you, and I really enjoy the research that you do. There's a lot of work that you put in, so I really appreciate the time that you've spent with everybody and really drilled into the stories and really drilled into us understanding better. I couldn't have imagined better conversations. I have the privilege of watching them just before they go on, and I'm like, yes, we did a thing again today. So thank you so much for carrying us in this way. And so to everybody, this is your captain speaking, Nyambura Waringe. Film season, no direct flight. Yes, I did that. And thank you very much for joining us on this journey. And the films are up until midnight East African time today. So don't miss them. And we hope that you'll continue to watch the different conversations that we've had. And Nyambura and I have always been talking about how do we archive. So you will see more from us for our enjoyment and pleasure. As I said, enjoy. So thank you for making the time, for getting the tickets, for liking, sharing, loving, asking questions, all those things that make algorithms in the internet work. So thank you very much for taking the time, everyone. And may you have a wonderful beginning of the week wherever you are. Mwah.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Nyambura.